Okay, I'm Andrew Gibbons. This is Rebecca Norton. Rebecca doesn't need to introduce herself, but I'm sure you will. Tell us in 3 seconds who you are, what you're doing here, Rebecca.
Morning, Andrew. Yeah, I'm Rebecca Norton from Sense of Direction, and I'm looking forward to another interesting conversation.
Well, I hope you have that later in the day. For the meantime, you're stuck with me. Uh, and no, we didn't rehearse this. Honestly, there's no script here, can't you tell? This is the issue that we're going to talk about today. And I found it on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn for me is a good source. Are you seeing that, Rebecca, to show
Yep,
it's the
yep.
LinkedIn's a good source for this sort of stuff. And all right, a lot of it just washes over you. And this one caught my attention. Forbes is a good source. It's credible. It's out there. So they don't put their name to anything which isn't statistically verifiable. Never mind the precise numbers. It's the issue, isn't it? Is there a cost of loyalty? Do people who stay in a job and don't hop about, do they pay a price for that? And is it compensated for by security? I don't know. There's a few things here. I'm already babbling. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When I read it first time, I did read it the wrong way round, and I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. Oh, wow, that's pretty amazing. I suppose, yeah, there are a number of things in here, and for me, maybe I'm a different generation, but for me, would it take a lot for me to stay in the same company? There'd need to be a big pull for me to stay in the same company for a long time, actually. Um, and that's more than just money, I suppose. So yes, the job security would come into it, but what else am I gaining? Are there other opportunities for me to climb the ladder, move sideways? I couldn't see myself staying in the same role for 40, 50 years.
You see, I'm interested by that. Of course, I'm interested by everything you say, because I'm a lot older than you, because I'll be even older next week than I am now. I started work in 1980. Uh, and I think then it was the opposite to what you're saying. I think I was surrounded in 1980 by people in a local government environment. And contextually, if it was an insurance company, an advertising agency, it could be different. But in a public service organization in 1980, I think the opposite was true. People were there saying, I'm here for the duration. I'm not going anywhere. Um, I came here at 18. I'm 38, 40 now, and they probably knew the year in which they intended to retire. And that's quite a change in my working lifetime, at least.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think it's a change in attitude. I think probably a lot of people would expect to move jobs now and roles and things. And I'm sure I've read somewhere that actually employers have started looking for people who would, they start to ask questions. If somebody stayed in a
Yeah.
position for longer than sort of 7 years, they're starting to ask
Oh.
questions like, well, why aren't they moving? Why aren't they progressing
Are you
or
too
whatever it is?
comfortable? You
Mm.
lack
But
ambition.
yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, do you have to have ambition? Is it all right to just stay in the same role? I suppose it depends on motivators, doesn't it?
Yeah, no,
Really.
all right, let's debunk this same role thing. I think people who stay in the same organization, apparently in the same job, it isn't the same job. The job
Yeah.
changes, they change
Yeah.
with it. Very often, people in very different jobs, even though they might be called something similar than when they started. So the job hasn't been any less challenging. It's been a lot more typically. So very often, even though they've stayed, they haven't stayed static.
No, and that's a very good point. I don't. It does change, doesn't it? And I don't always know that it changes for the better. I suspect if you asked people how it was 10 years ago, is it better or worse than it is now? I'm not entirely sure that you'd get lots of positives actually. But yes, I suppose it does evolve, doesn't it? The role evolves, and I suppose the added benefit of having somebody who's there for the long term is that they do bring more experience with them. They get to know their role, their organisation. They develop the skills in that. I
Yeah.
think that can be a good thing, but
Ooh.
potentially there might be some hindrance with that as well, because I think people can tend to say, well, this is the way we've always done it.
Yeah, okay, it's easy to default to that, and I know that's true what you're saying for a lot of people, but I think that's as far as a lot of people go when they think about that, because I think, in my mind, I'm wrong occasionally. Just kind of got strong opinions, didn't make me right on things, but you're right. When you talk about people who've been in a job for 30 years, the usual thing is, oh well, they've given up trying to change anything 25 years ago. But that isn't true for everyone. Some of the most impassioned, committed, dynamic people I've come across have been in their 60s, and some of the people who's get up and go has got up and gone have been in their 20s. So I think
Yeah.
it's a bit too easy to generalize, and I think that's in there for me. In those numbers, for me, is a body of people who tend to get overlooked and their contribution probably less valued quite a few years before they leave the organization.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I suppose then, if would do we make an assumption from that quote that if people are getting paid 50% less, does that mean that they're not moving up the ranks? Because
Could
surely, even if
be,
you're in the same
could
organization,
be.
if you're in the same organization and you're moving up, then surely you should be on a higher pay rate.
All right. Okay. That's a very good point too. God, we're very good at complimenting each other, aren't we? Getting cozy on this. Let's start falling out more often. Every now and again, I mean, I've been self-employed since 1992. I sometimes say I'm self-unemployed. It's nearer to that sometimes. But I haven't worked in organization as an employee since 1992. And sometimes I say to myself, if I'd stayed until the age I'm at, and right now I'm in my 60s, so I probably wouldn't be there at all. But there were times in that when I said, I'm getting to the point. Where would I be now if I'd stayed? Where in the career ladder? I don't think I'd have stayed in the same job precisely I was in. I did have some ambition, but I stayed there 5 years, moved out, and so on. But I do that sometimes, and I'm convinced that I would have been with those people who just didn't stay in the same job. I would have progressed. Now,
Yeah.
that's all presuming the organization stays in the same shape. It outsourced a lot, almost everything that I was doing then, ultimately in the 90s. So
Yeah.
organizations don't always provide a safe berth for people like they used to.
No, they don't. And originally, I one of my main job when I was quite a bit younger, actually, I suppose. But when I started out, was in working for Sheffield City Council in their recreation department. And when I started, there was a handful of people, and that's probably the longest serving job that I've been in, and that was about 7, 8 years. And I didn't stay in the same role, so I did move a little bit and change positions within that, but still within the same department. And it grew and it grew, and it was huge at one
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
But now I got made redundant because they had to start making cuts. And now, quite a few years later, that that department barely exists. I think again, it's there as a token.
Yeah.
So you're right, organisations shift and change, partly due to funding, partly due to sort of cultural things, and perhaps there's not as much emphasis on one area or another and what have you. So it does change and it morphs. And I think so. I suppose that's why that quote's interesting for me. You know, if you stay in this, it's not the same job, is it? And I
Yeah,
suppose that
yeah.
thing it's
Stay
not.
loyal. Stay loyal to your job, but the job itself could change and
Yes.
reflect new circumstance. But let's not kid ourselves. There could be people who stay in the same job,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
who are just doing the job in 2023 that they started in the 1970s, perhaps.
Yeah. And I think it depends on the industries as well, doesn't it? If it's in retail in a big department store, then the likelihood that's not going to change huge amounts, and I would imagine that that department store is probably still there in 20, 30 years. Where in some organisations that more moving and more, it will change, maybe it ceases to trade or whatever. There are organisations that just sort of collapse as well, aren't there, I suppose? So
I'm starting to think about this now as we talk, which is why we do this. I think that's why I do this, because I get thoughts and ideas that I wouldn't have got without saying them out loud. And that's why I'm glad we're doing this interactive thing. But I guess I'm thinking, if you don't get in the pattern of moving jobs 2, 3 years, 4, 5 years, certainly less than 7 years, I've always thought, if you lose the pattern of movement, then you're more likely to stay where you are for forever or until you're shifted out. Because I don't think you spend 20 years in a job and say, hey, I need to start moving my job every 3 to 5 years.
No, but I think it becomes harder to move. If you've stayed there longer, then it
Yeah,
becomes harder to move as well. But
definitely.
there are benefits. I can see why people will want to. So when I at my secondary school, which is a long time ago,
Oh, we're going even further back.
I go even further back now. Our teachers remained static, our teachers remained the same. And even after I left for many years, the same teachers still worked in that school. Now,
Yeah,
to me, that was a good sign that one, they felt secure in
yeah,
that job and that they enjoyed their job.
yeah, yeah.
Because schools and teachers now, people are out of the industry, never mind changing
Attritional.
schools, they
It's
leave the
attritional.
profession.
Yeah.
No.
All
So
right, we're moving off point here. My fault. Are you one of those people that if you meet your teacher when in your 30s, that from when you're 8, you still call them Mr. So and so or Miss something?
yes, and I do still have my form tutor. He still runs books, and I find it incredibly difficult to call him by his first name now.
I know the thought of calling my headmaster, hello, Nick. When I used to see him in his 70s, and when I'd have been, I don't know, in my 20s or something, I don't know. But it's just impossible. Anyway, back to the point. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So lots of factors here, aren't there? And I
Mm.
guess the other thing is that the reward for movement. We haven't talked about that. And I know people who have been who are earning a lot more money, unquestionably, in their mid-20s, in probably their third job, than if they'd stayed in the first one that they're in. So I think there is definitely a premium as a young person who hasn't got in the groove of staying somewhere a long time, and as we said,
Yeah.
to move out of. I think there is a premium that's paid to people who have got job mobility. And I think you're right. Certain employers, certain, not all employers,
Yeah.
will say, hey, I like the fact that you're confident enough to move. That shows a degree of self-confidence and
Yeah.
of a willingness to take on new challenges. I don't know. Employers make up their own reasons for liking what they see.
And I think it just brings in new ideas, and I suppose depending on where you have worked, maybe they see that as an advantage that you can bring in ideas that's being used elsewhere. And I think that's one of the advantages with changing role and getting for the employer, bringing new people in. I think that's the advantage to them is that they get fresh ideas, maybe fresh enthusiasm, and potentially different ways of doing things. I think
Yeah.
if the employer is willing to listen.
Anyway, then again, I'm looking at time. Crikey, it's going fast today. Another thing about bringing new people in, it's to the detriment of the progression of people already there sometimes.
Yeah. And maybe that's where that sometimes there's resentment, isn't it? If people are being overlooked, that's internal. It gets very complex. This is quite a deep
Where are we going now?
yeah.
We knew there was some depth to this, but I don't think we really appreciated just how many places this could spin off to.
No, definitely not.
So okay, it's 12 minutes by my stopwatch on the big monitor there. What's the big takeaway for you from this so far, given that we could have gone on for at least 3 hours?
The quote doesn't surprise me in the
Yep.
first instance, but what it's got me thinking about is different things to what I was thinking when we first started this conversation. So I'm sort of more aware that there's a lot more elements to this than I first thought.
Worrying, isn't it? You think we got something nailed down, and suddenly you start talking and think, wow, look at this thing. We don't really understand it at all.
No.
And of course, it is very contextually specific.
Yeah.
It's there's plenty of people and organizations this would never be true of. There's lots of ways out of this one. But I think it's all about understanding what this could mean to a specific organization in which anybody's in.
Yeah.
Let's end it there because otherwise we'll pick it up and take it on to another 3 or 4
I
hours.
know, I've already got ideas.
One sentence and it gets us going like this is good. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.